Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. We are planning on having a very, very good discussion with everyone and to mostly glean your minds in terms of where Africa should go and what is the place of the youth in that journey. But as with any house, there are rules just so that we can keep the conversation flowing, keep it clean for everyone to participate as much as they can and also learn as much as they can. So I'm just going to go through a few rules for us um, to keep in mind as we are going through this dialogue with one another. So the first rule slash point of information is that there will be translation available for French and Portuguese speakers. And if you are an English speaker who finds yourself in a French conversation, there are also interpreters for you. Please just click the English interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd like to hear the message in French, you would click the French button. And if you'd like to hear the message in Portuguese, you would do so with the Portuguese button. Secondly, there is going to be a Q&A session. All participants are encouraged to participate and bring forward their questions. The more questions, the more engagement, and the more engagement, the more we can get out of the session. So please do give as much questions as possible, and we'll try for as much as possible for them to be addressed by our keynote speakers and our different speakers who have been invited today. Attendees are requested to raise their hands and will be granted permission to speak only once recognized by the moderator. This is just to keep everyone from talking over one another. Participants are also encouraged to utilize the questions and answer booth throughout the session. So if you feel like your question is not being recognized, or if you just think that you might forget your question, please do use the Q&A booth. The Q&A box is also at the bottom of your screen. After the closing of the Q&A session with our keynote speakers, we will head into our breakaway rooms, which have been chosen during the registration period. However, as things do change and people do change, you are allowed to change your mind about which breakaway room you'd like to be in. Please just chat privately or put in our chat box to the host for them to change you into the into the breakout room that you would like to be in. And finally, realize that some participants would like to participate in more than one breakaway room discussion. So again, if you do find yourself in a breakaway room, we are still able to hear you if you put in the chat, even during the breakaway room. So just put in the chat that you'd like to change, and we'll do our best to change you in a timeous manner. But also obviously keeping in mind that you are with other people. So just be respectful in the way that you enter and you leave a space. With that, if there aren't any questions, I'd like us to, if there aren't any questions, then we can start. I think I'll hand over to our moderator and someone that I'm very, very excited to hear myself, Miss Isa Tu. If I'm butchering your name, please do let me know. This is a space that we encourage respect in. So Isa Tu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nonku. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We are very excited and happy that you're able to make it to this dialogue, which is very important and timely, especially for the countries that will be having elections this year. In our midst, we have the founder of Minds, Dr. Nkoza Moyo. We would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us. We also have Minds Advisory Board member, Dr. Adebayo Olukoshi, and Mrs. Gracia Michelle. Welcome all of you for joining us, and welcome everyone. Before we head to the actual introduction, I wanted to just give a brief kind of like overview of what we will be doing. I believe you all received the program. We will have a panel discussion. After my introduction, we will have a panel discussion to be led by Dr. Moyo, who will be in a discussion with Dr. Adebayo on the topic of elections and governance. And then after their panel, we will be having a Q&A, a kind of open discussion for 20 minutes. Like Nonku said, feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A box. And when it is time for questions and answers session, I will like everyone who have a question to raise their hands, and then we can have the dialogue to flow properly. And after the Q&A session, we are going to head out into 4 different breakout rooms, which will be led by mine alumni. We have different people and we have exciting topics. I believe the discussion will be very interesting there. And after that, we will all come back to the main group, and then we will go for 15 minutes break. And after the break, we will go back into our own reporting of what we learned or what we discussed in the breakout rooms. And then we will have a conclusion and way forward and a final vote of thanks to be given by Nonko. So before we go to the actual panel discussion or start the dialogue with the panel discussion, I just wanted to share a few words of why MIND is hosting this dialogue. And I will begin with a quote by Dr. Moyo, who is the founder of MINDS. The quote says, "Youth have the potential, if used properly and intelligently, to define an African social, economic, and political agenda which can contribute to a progressive and developmental Africa that can meet African needs." According to the African Union, over 35% of people are between the ages of 15 and 35. In general, it is saying that 65% of Africa's 1 billion population is comprised of young people under the age of 35, which is a very good statistics to reflect on. Because
menos de 35 anos, o que é muito umas boas estatísticas.
African youth participation in political and economic processes is either low or negative. I believe there is a question, somebody is talking about translation. I believe the translation should be going on simultaneously. And if you are not getting the translation, perhaps it's your interpretation setting. If you go to the interpretation at the bottom, you will see different languages and you can select the one that you want to listen in, like either English, French, or Portuguese. So if anyone is not getting the translation, check the interpretation button at the bottom and then have your interpretation language on. The interpretation is going on simultaneously. So why MIND is hosting this dialogue? MIND is a unique institution in Africa that makes a real and measurable difference across the continent. It serves as a platform that connects citizens, youth and civil society, the private and public sector, scientists, academics, politicians, and other stakeholders. MIND facilitates debates that explore and shape responses to key challenges facing all Africans, and in its activities and programs, informs policy formulation and implementation in a non-partisan manner. MIND recognizes that there are many different African communities, but it provides a coherent framework for African voices to speak as one in our globalized world, following the ethos of Nelson Mandela, who urged young people, I quote, to create their own table for a shared vision of the Africa they want, a feature that is rooted in Africanness. Minds believe that active youth participation in governance and an ongoing engagement with leadership and governance processes will hasten the transformation of the continent, bringing us closer to the realization of the socio-economic and political conditions needed to sustainably improve the living standards of African society. For this reason, MINDS developed a youth program in elections and governance designed to strengthen the quality of youth engagement in the electoral and political governance processes in Africa. MINDS has done this by challenging African youth to link the creation of the Africa of their dreams with the kind of leaders they help choose through the electoral processes and the leaders they themselves become. We have some young people here today who are leaders in parliament in their various countries, and some are leaders in local governance at their various countries. Towards this end, MINDS has convened young people from across Africa and trained them on elections and governance issues. Today's dialogue forms part of this framework and aims to give a platform to young Africans to not only engage in the election and governance processes of their own countries and communities, but also share ideas and best practices towards a more refined and effective engagement. I welcome our speakers from Cape Verde, the Gambia, Chad, South Africa, South Sudan, and Zambia, who all went to elections or will be having their elections before the end of the year. And we welcome the rest of the continent on this occasion, trusting that today's engagement will be a break in the Africa we seek to build. Thanks all for joining us. And now I will hand over the floor to Dr. Moyo, who will lead us in a discussion, panel discussion with Dr. Adebayo on elections and governance in Africa. Dr. Moyo, I think you are on mute.
Right, thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you for the introduction, which you did very elegantly. Allow me to firstly recognize our chair, Mrs. Michelle, and also Professor Adebayo, who is on the advisory board, as already indicated. So hello to both of you, and I can't say welcome. I suppose Mrs. Michelle should be welcoming all of us. Now, I've taken license to change the title a bit because I'm very, I tend to be strict with the use of language because I think language shapes the way you do things in terms of the order in which you address issues, the sequencing of issues. So, and I'll explain why I've slightly changed the title that I'm presenting. So what I'm calling my little chart is changing the attitude of African youth from protesters to voters, not to parliamentarians, but to voters. And I'll explain why as we go along. So why do we fixate so much as minds on the youth? And I think Isatu has already told us part of the story. The youth are the majority in terms of the demographics of the continent. You are the majority. No matter how imperfect our institutions are, our institutions by and large are driven by a majoritarian approach to the things we do. It doesn't matter what community it is. The community will tend to do things according to how the majority of people within that community think things should be done. So if the youth on the African continent are the majority, putting it very bluntly, to you all young people, is that everything that is not right with the continent is your fault. Because you've got the levers of changing everything on this continent if only you mobilize yourselves and accept the responsibility and agency of creating that future that will work for you and the continent. So everything that's not working is your fault. To back up my contention or hypothesis, if you like, look at what has just happened in Zambia. We've got a new president in Zambia because of what the youth consciously decided to go and do. Register to vote, turn up in huge numbers to do the voting, and then critically protect the vote. So you have to do those three things: register, vote, and protect the vote. But those things in themselves are not enough if you do not know what you are voting for. It means one of the most critical things about what is going on the continent, and I think hopefully it's obvious to most of us, is that a lot of the people who are leading this continent are not the right people. They are not in the correct jobs. We are like employers who've gone looking for an accountant and hired a marketing person instead. And then we are surprised that the accounts are not being done properly. If we'd done our homework and understood upfront what job we want to be done, we would have looked for the correct skills and then would have got an accountant to do the numbers. But we keep going out there and hiring a marketeer to come and do the books. And then we are surprised that it's not working. So the youth are responsible. You are in the majority, yeah? Then when you look at the issues of unemployment, the youth are impacted the most. Your futures are being destroyed right in front of your eyes. You've got the numbers, you've got the leverage, your futures are being destroyed, but all you do is protest. What you need to do is take a step back and begin to be more deliberate in channeling your energies in a very productive way. Protesting is fine. I'm not saying it's not okay. It's okay to register that you are not happy through protest or whatever. But if you stop at protesting, it's like somebody who goes out and says, I've got no roof over my head, and they just shouts in the street, but doesn't then do anything to go and mobilize the resources necessary to build a house. That's a bit pointless. You're wasting your energy. So you can register and make the people around you know that you're not satisfied with what's going on. But more critically, then take ownership of creating what will work for you. Take ownership of creating the Africa that will work for you. You cannot escape that responsibility and expect it to happen on its own. Another example I like to quote here is what happened in the last elections in America. You know, anybody can make a mistake. So about 5-6 years ago, Americans went and voted for Donald Trump to be their president because at that point in time, they thought he would be the right person to deliver what they wanted. They experienced 4 years of a behavior which became clearer and clearer that, in fact, this is not what America needed. What they didn't just go out into the streets and protest. They mobilized big time. So that in spite of Trump getting 75 million votes, he still lost the election. Why? Not because people just went out in the streets and protested, but because they went out and registered, turned out to vote, and protected the vote. The outcome depends on each and every one of those steps being taken. Protesting on its own, fine, but not sufficient. Protest, register to vote, turn up and vote, and protect the vote. What do we see on the African continent in contrast? People go and protest, young people in particular. When it comes to voter registration, young people don't go and register. When it comes to protecting the vote of those few who go and vote, young people on the African continent want somebody to pay them money to go and secure their own country. And you can see the confusion. You was asking somebody to give you money to go and do what you should be doing for yourself. How can that make sense? So if you get clarity, absolute clarity, what kind of Africa you want, what your responsibility is, and why you're doing it at a very personal level, i.e., I'm doing it for me, my children, and my grandchildren, then you will invest, you will take ownership, you will have agency to go out there and execute. You will have agency to mobilize each other so you can use your numbers. That superiority of the demographic in numbers, turn it into something meaningful. Let it not just remain a statistic. This is not helping the continent, it's not helping you, it's not going to help your future. Until we understand this, we are in trouble. The other thing that I think you need to really, really understand is the concept that in the animal kingdom, of which humanity is part, everything revolves around contestation. We can call it anything we like, but actually on your daily life basis, you're making decisions which are a delicate balance between contest or cooperate with people around you. And the decision of which one of those two you are going to adopt depends on your clarity, first, what your interests are and how you're going to get them and how you mobilize other people to get the numbers to lead you to achieve what your interests are. Contestation. What does contestation also imply? It means you are responsible for creating the outcomes that are on your side. If you are a member of a football team, you understand it intuitively. The team that you are playing against is not going to play to let you win. They are going to do everything in their power, rightly so, because that's their responsibility to try to win the match. It is your responsibility, on the other hand, to make sure that the outcome of that match is in your favor. But you don't do that by sitting on the benches. You do that by participating in that team and making sure that each member of the team is competent and can play their role so that the team delivers. Where does that lead us to? You know, you talk about going to parliament. I am shifting that to saying, I want you to focus on the voting process, because whether we're talking about governance or good leadership or whatever, it's all the candidates who submit themselves for what I call an application for a job. They are coming to you. You are part of a panel that is going to choose by casting your vote. But how do you cast your vote if you haven't done your homework? What is necessary for you to make the right choice? Firstly, you need to know what future you want. What do I want to achieve? Then you need to look at the applications and see who has got the best fit to be able to do the job that you want done. And so it means you have got a responsibility, firstly, to decide what future you want. And secondly, you have to do your homework in scrutinizing the CVs and track records of the people who offer themselves for your trying to get your vote. If you don't do those two things, firstly, you know, like they say, if you don't know where you want to go, any road will lead you there. So if you are not clear where you want to go, what job needs to be done, how are you going to choose the right candidate to do what? Secondly, if you don't invest energy and time in scrutinizing the CVs and backgrounds and track records of all of the candidates who offer themselves, on what basis are you going to choose? These are things which we need to take ownership of. Let's not just sit back and complain about, oh, we've got poor leadership and this and this and the other. We are not doing our homework. I just gave you the example of Zambia, the US. The changes that have happened or happened in these countries are because the voters understood their responsibility in deciding the outcome, turned up in numbers, made their homework, used the experience of being led badly to determine that they needed change. They brought all of this together by mobilizing the numbers, choosing correctly, and protecting the vote to get the results that they should get. So, getting into parliament for young people, I have to be very honest with you. Personally, my mind is divided. If you're a young person and you decide at your age to go into politics, and then you are a Democrat, a proper Democrat, and you've not consolidated a career to be able to feed yourself and your family, what happens when you lose the election? What are you going to go? Where are you going to go? Where are you going to start from? My own view is that the primary responsibility for young people is to use your numbers to get the correct people into parliament, rather than trying to go into politics yourself at a premature point in your development, because you don't have anything as yet to fall back on. If in fact you are a Democrat and accept that you could lose an election, when you lose that election, are you employable? Have you formed a foundation which you can go back to? If you haven't, I can almost say you are the kind of person who is going to cause us a problem, because without options, you're not going to want to get out of power. So let's be very honest to each other. Young people going into politics are the same people who will not want to get out even when they lose the elections, because they'll have nothing to fall back on. So when you are young, what should you be doing? Create a foundation on which you can support yourself and your family outside of politics, because politics is very ephemeral. You can win, you can lose, and you need to be prepared for the possibility of losing, rather than assuming I'll win and stay in politics. You know that I ran for the presidency two years ago. I lost, but it didn't destroy my life, because I had a life to go back to. And that's what you need to think about. And we need to be very open to each other, that be clear about what your responsibility is. Exercise your responsibility as a citizen to make your voice heard, to exercise your vote and your choice, and consolidate a foundation which will support a life that you want with your family, and use politics as offering yourself for service to your country. And you can do it for 5 years, 10 years, or whatever, but still be able to then move on or backwards to whatever you were doing before. Let me leave it at that, and we can answer. I can participate in answering any questions that you may have. Thanks very much, Isatu and Sarah, and Nonku.
Thank you, Dr. Moyo. We will have Dr. Adebayo. Dr. Adebayo is around.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. And a very good morning, afternoon, early evening to each and every one of you. It's a great pleasure to be part of this initiative and also to see a number of very familiar faces. I'd like to reserve a special appreciation and greetings to Her Excellency Grace Grasa Machel, and also very warm greetings to Nkosana Moyo, founding spirits, both of them, and driving forces of minds. I salute your commitment to our continent and to the continuing struggle for the transformation of the continent. It's not always easy to talk after Nkosana Moyo, and he's shared with you some very, I think, challenging thoughts about the role which the youth could play in the remaking of our continent, which resonates very much with me, even in the provocative way in which he put it, by charging you, the youth, as the people who are responsible for our present predicament on the continent. And I take that as a healthy provocation, because in every respect, I think the dictum which Frantz Fanon shared with us many, many years ago, when in the context of the struggle for independence on our continent, Frantz Fanon very much immersed in the Algerian liberation struggle, though coming from the Caribbean himself, wrote some lines which have remained really truly memorable, namely that every generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its historic mission and fulfill or betray it. And I think that is very much embodied in which, in what Dr. Moyo has just shared with you, in saying that the responsibility actually lies squarely on your table. Because as a successor generation, you do have a responsibility to not only be an active part of the making of society in our various countries, but also to be the drivers of change. And that effectively means being not only an active citizen in every sense of the word, but also simultaneously partaking in the defining of the kinds of vision that can propel our countries to a new level. There will be really not too much point at this stage in enumerating all of the things that are wrong on our continent today. And I think in a sense, Dr. Moyo, you are even generous in making the analogy of the accountant and the marketing executive. Because I would say that in some parts of our continent, it's actually worse than that. It's not just hiring, making the wrong hires, but actually, in a certain sense, if we were to put it really bluntly, there's a high level of criminality that has also infused what is supposed to be leadership in many of our countries, as to create the impression of a political system that is unyielding and which essentially amounts to the asylum being taken over by the prisoners and defining the rules for the rest of us. And I think this characterization of the context in which we find ourselves, which one might define as a historic leadership crisis, a crisis of historic proportions on the continent, is one which I believe, is both a challenge, a threat, and a challenge on the one hand, but also an opportunity and an enabler of the kinds of change which we might want to see, and which can only be underwritten by your generation, by the youth of the continent. And in saying that, I am comforted by the fact that the story of our continent and the moments of transformation on the continent at different stages of our evolution over the last century or more has involved an active and frontline leadership role by young people, by the youth of the continent in different ways. Politically, if you look at the struggle for the independence of the continent, those who underwrote that struggle, those who organized in order to be able to bring independence to us, were in every respect young people. They were youth, some of them as young as some of you who are part of this conversation. Whether it be from Kwame Nkrumah, freshly out of his doctoral studies in the US, or Jomo Kenyatta, or Kenneth Kaunda, name them, Leopold Sedar Senghor, Samora Moises Machel, even to some great extent, Agostinho Neto, without exception. These were all young people. In South Africa, where Mines is itself located, remember that the story of the ANC, in terms of its role as a driver of a liberation project in South Africa and inspiring liberation struggles in other parts of the Southern Africa region, began to change when the Youth League of the ANC, led by a certain Nelson Mandela, supported by some of his other colleagues, like Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo and Govan Mbeki, began also to push within the ANC for both a change of strategy, but also a mass mobilization that went beyond what the founding leaders of the ANC were able to themselves conceive and advance up to that point in time. So at every stage of our struggles and at every moment of change, youth have always been an integral and central component of that effort. In the post-independence period of the 60s and 70s, when we witnessed some of the worst forms of authoritarian rule on the continent, in the form of military rule, in the form of sometimes autocratic single-party rule without any popular base to it of any kind. We also realized that those who were in the vanguard of what culminated in the onset of a new era of democratization of our continent in the late 1980s and 1990s were again the young people of the continent. Taking the demonstrations that unfolded for many months in Cotonou in Benin Republic, where some of the agitation for reforms began to crystallize, it was essentially women and the youth who filled the streets of Cotonou, not the leaders of political parties, not the veteran leaders of trade unions or even of those political institutions that were recognized within either the one-party state or the military civilian diarchy that controlled most of the countries. It was mostly young people who took to the streets, male and female, supported by their mothers, and sustaining demonstrations in the case of Benin Republic for up to 6 months, demanding a sovereign national conference to reimagine their country, and in that process setting in motion a chain of events that eventually led to what some have described as Africa's entry into the third wave of global democratization. Again, there I underscore what Nkosana Moyo has shared with us, namely that the agency of the youth at every stage has always been a game changer, and often for the better of the betterment of the continent. At this present point in time, we are at a crossroads on our continent, and those crossroads are fairly familiar to you, probably also explaining, at least in studies which International IDEA and others have conducted, partly explaining why there is a youth disaffection with politics on the continent, a disaffection which manifests itself with low levels of youth participation in elections and a certain politics of anti-politics that appears to have taken hold in many countries, in which basically there's an aversion for politics. But I think here again, the challenge which is posed is one of how we as a continent, and I do not mean to define the challenge in your place, but where I see it and how I see it, that we as a continent, how we can build a democratic system of governance that simultaneously is able to deliver development. So that in a sense, if the first generation delivered political liberation to us and brought us to independence and tried in its own way to try to advance an agenda of state building and nation building against the backdrop of a divisive colonial system and of a state infrastructure that was underdeveloped, a second generation that tried to push an agenda of re-democratizing the continent from the single party and military authoritarian forms of governance that predominated soon after independence. This generation, it seems to me, has the historic responsibility of ensuring that as citizens, we are able to enjoy the fullness of our rights, including our political rights, not only to choose our leaders, but also to participate in core decision-making processes in our countries, and also exact accountability from those whom we elect in the context of electoral integrity. But over and above that, ensure that the system of democratic governance also delivers development of the kind which will ensure that we are able to expand our productive capacity, become a fulsome part of the global economic process as an equal player, be able to generate employment, promote innovation, and so on and so forth. And that twin project of democratization, deepening, making it accountable, making it relevant, and simultaneously unleashing the productive energies of the peoples of our continent, it seems to me, is an historic challenge which we are confronted with. And the youth of the continent, obviously in terms of numbers, but even over and above that, the kinds of skills that need to be brought to the table are well placed to help us drive the process, especially in the context of a global move towards the so-called fourth industrial revolution. And here I will close, begin to wind down my observations by underscoring that let us not make the mistake of assuming that this challenge can ever be fully realized in the absence of a politicized youth. You can have all of the skills in the world, and it's an important piece of advice which Nkosana shared with us, that it's always good to have your skills and competencies which you can fall back on in case any foray you may make into politics comes unstuck at one point or the other. And God knows that our continent has suffered a lot from the hands of professional politicians, full-time professional politicians who do nothing other than politics from morning to night. The rest of us are trying to be engineers or medical doctors or whatever, academics, social workers, doing useful things, but there are people who just wake up from morning to night, out of whom we recruit leadership presently, and effectively their job is politics as a full-time vocation. Perhaps something that we might want to all rethink over time, insofar as there are also experiments in parts of the world today where people are able to take responsibility in the political arena, but not consider that that is their full-time vocation. Part-time doctor, part-time politician. And I think the example of Bhutan, for example, has been very widely cited. But there are also other cases around the world. But that's just a digression. My main point is to underscore that unless we have a politicized youth, politicized to understand that the disciplining of power and participation in the affairs of the Commonwealth is a responsibility, a compulsory responsibility, not a leisurely choice to be exercised. We will in fact not be able to get the kind of critical mass which we need in order to build a movement, an organized movement of young people who are able to become a vanguard of our quest for transformation on the continent today. And it is precisely, I think, the lesson which we can take from the lives of those whom we consider to be some of the heroes and heroines of our continent, of a Kwame Nkrumah, who would always remind the people when he returned to Ghana, and at the very height of British imperial power in the international system, began to organize the people and to work with like-minded people to say that the key to freedom and to success is organization. And that resonates with the kind of message which the late Nelson Mandela always shared at every opportunity when he would speak to young people and his peers across the continent and the world. The importance of organization and the disciplining frame which it provides for you to project a vision and to pursue that vision. Of the kinds of experience which we saw with Thomas Sankara, though a military officer, but a very young one with very clear ideas of societal transformation, in which he said to the people of Burkina, to his fellow military officers, that a soldier who does not have political education, a combatant who is not politicized, is almost like an armed bandit. You put weapons in the hands of a soldier, and that soldier has absolutely no political education, or you put weapons in the hands of a combatant, and they have absolutely no project of society around which that weapon can be disciplined and deployed. Then they become basically the kinds of agents of destruction and banditry, which we see. And that also resonated with Amilcar Cabral. Organize, he said, don't agonize, organize, and left that as a message for us. So my charge to you, feeding very much into Dr. Moyo's keynote address, is to say that this generation has a responsibility to discover its mission. And I hope in the course of your conversations in the various groups that we will be going into, you will in fact try to discover what is the key challenge of the moment for the people of our continent. What is the role that the youth should be playing in that process? And how can we, as participants in the Minds family, help to start that process of change along with fellow young people in different walks of life so that Africa can really find its place in the Committee of Nations. Our condition is not a fatalistic condition. We are not condemned to what we are experiencing. But let us take what we experience as a starting point for building a new Africa. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adebayo and Dr. Moyo, for the very powerful deliberation. So now we will have a few minutes for question and answer session. If you have a question for either Dr. Moyo or Dr. Adebayo, you can raise your hand at the bottom of your screen. You will see the reaction function, the emoji. There is a hand raised. Raise your hand and then I will call your name if you have a hand raised, and then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. We have Ras.
Greetings, everyone. I am here in South Africa, and we are like yesterday. What happened is the IEC said they were gonna on Monday. The IEC said they're gonna close the candidate stuff by 5 o'clock, and then they extended it till 9. And then when we observed the system, it was still open past 9. So currently in South Africa, the political parties and everybody was scrambling because like a week or two ago, we were given the ultimatum that elections will go on. And then there was this commission with the IEC. So in terms of deepening democracy at this point in time, we didn't have registration weekend. We were going to have a registration weekend July, August, end of July and August, that weekend, the last weekend of July. And that registration weekend was also cancelled. And then all of a sudden, the IEC said that we can register online, and that was during that lockdown. So someone from the grassroots, I couldn't prepare my community because there wasn't voting stations and polls open. And now this has happened. And so that's just a comment, and I would like everyone to be cognizant of the developments with the local government elections that's supposed to happen in October, but we're still waiting for the Constitutional Court to make its final pronouncement. And then there's also issues with the Constitutional Court because certain parties applied for extensions and stuff, and then the Constitutional Court just refused to reply. And then Monday came, and then they closed the selection of candidates. Our Constitutional Court also delayed answering certain political parties that asked them for clarity. And then Monday came, and then they closed the system. So all in all of that, as a young person in South Africa and South Africa experiencing all of the political dynamics that we are currently experiencing, what would the advice from the doctors be in context of that? Because clearly we are being excluded from participating as wannabe people that want to be representatives, or just people that are activists on the ground that want to put their own type of leadership in place. Specifically with South Africa, we're waiting for the Concord. I pray that October we don't go to elections because I have been compromised. My municipality has been compromised. And I live in the Western Cape, so we are still under a DA formation in the Western Cape. The other provinces in South Africa are under ANC formation. But I will expand again if there's any questions on that. That's just basically what I wanted to say, because I couldn't register 100 to 200 young people and then switching it over all of a sudden to online registration. It's just confusing because there wasn't a plan for online registration prior to Corona. So then a lockdown came, the registration weekend was cancelled, and all of a sudden there's technology in place for online registration, which was crazy. And then the issue with Monday. So the IEC was supposed to close the polls or the submission of candidates by 9, but still the IEC opened, the website was open. So they gave us a 4-hour extension from 5, but still at 9, we could see that still people are submitting. And clearly we're living in an ANC society. So we don't know if the IEC is in cahoots with the ANC, because we know the ANC, they were shooting each other about candidate lists in Limpopo and in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng and in Pretoria. So that's just what I have observed in South Africa as we prepare for local government elections. And this is me speaking here from the Western Cape. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ras. May I ask that people can go straight to their questions, at least in a minute, so we can have time for other people to ask questions. Dr. Adebayo or Dr. Moyo, any of you want to take on that question, please?
Prof, do you want to go?
I'll defer to you on this, Dr. Moyo.
Okay, so my view to my opinion as far as RAS issue is concerned is firstly that I'm not a South African, so any comment I make has to be taken with that in mind. But my observation would be that for the time being, the court system, the judiciary in South Africa is trying to do a good job. So I don't know that the Constitutional Court will be doing anything in favor of any particular political party. That's point number one. Point number two, what I've heard suggests to me that what is being done affects everybody. And that's why it's important to understand the concept of contestation. The party that is going to win is the party with members who are prepared to confront these obstacles or hindrances and still go out there because they are committed, they've got a goal, and they're going to attain it. If you sit back and say these hurdles are too much for me, then don't be surprised if your team loses. That's really all I can say, that the judiciary in South Africa appears to me to be neutral and trying to do the right thing. Everything I've heard says it's the same for everybody. So if you are committed and you know what you want, better confront the obstacles that essentially challenge everybody else and go and do what you need to do.
Thank you very much. I'll just add there that I'm also aware that the IEC has an appeals mechanism, which has and others might want to take advantage of, who have the same strong feelings. And to the best of my knowledge, that appeals mechanism also has observers present from all of the registered political parties in South Africa. In fact, it's embedded within the political parties forum, which the IEC convenes and which is led by the chair of the IEC personally. So do take advantage of that to draw attention to any discontents you might have observed with the online registration. And I think perhaps just at a more general level that may be relevant to participants from other parts of the continent. Many election management bodies across Africa are now introducing online registration, partly to respond to the COVID context, but also in some instances as a mechanism for ensuring what they call continuous registration of candidates. And I encourage those of you who are active in encouraging young people to register to vote, to also include in your voter education pack the option for how to register online and to do so effectively. Thank you.
Thank you for that context, Dr. Adebayo, and thanks, Dr. Moyo. So we have Albert, you're next to ask your question. And please, it's important to give context, but keep it short. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. Are you getting me?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. I would love to get the clarity based on what Dr. Moyo said concerning the youth participation in politics. Yeah, so one thing is that looking at how old a youth in Africa gets established or gains to have something to call an investment or something to rely on, you get that mostly when you're above 40. Yeah, and then you should wait. If we were to wait for us to become established in order for us to have something to lean on, adventure, we bounce from being maybe into active politics. And then we have young people who have the ego to join politics, and then we have young people that are doing it, maybe from the student union affairs and the like. We have seen leadership and love to support them. And then if you tell us to say we need to establish ourselves first before joining politics so that we can have that to lean on, I think that would be, I don't think the youth should be able to participate, because by the time we get established, we are not youth anymore. Other people will be able to be called youths. Yeah, so this is Albert from Zambia, Copperbelt. I'm actually a student also, so I would love to Dr. Moyo to clarify on that.
Thank you. So thank you, Albert, for your question. Firstly, holding political office is not the same as being politically active. The whole point about us pointing out that you need to go and register and vote and protect your vote, that is being politically active. Holding political office, however, when you are young, is your means of sustenance, the way you support your livelihood. If you go, and in fact, let me ask you a slightly different question. Would you say the same if I say to you, Albert, don't go get married unless you can support a family? I don't think you would give me the same kind of reaction. But this is the same. All I'm telling you is, if you don't have a means of supporting yourself, and you understand and you, in fact, agree and believe in democracy and accept that you can win or lose the elections, you need to tell me. You tell me what I'm missing. If you go and you are 18, you get elected to parliament, the next time round you lose in election, tell me what you're going to do to support your family. I need to hear from you in case I don't understand something about the youth and I'm missing it. For me, it's the same thing as saying, don't go getting married before you are able to support your family. There's no difference. But it does not mean don't be politically active. You must absolutely be politically active. And I think the prof essentially said it when he was quoting people like Sankara and so on and so on. And yeah, that you need to be politicized in order to act politically, but that's not the same as holding political office prematurely.
Thank you, Dr. Moyo. It's Sunday. You have your hand raised. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sunday from Nigeria, and I want to direct my question to Dr. Adebayo. Yeah, my question is, I'm from Nigeria, like I actually said, and there's something that's actually very common in Nigeria election, which is election violence. There's a lot of guns. The last election that was held, that was still in Nigeria, there was like I experienced violence. There were youths, they came down from a vehicle with guns. We all had to run away, and they snatched the ballot box. They were ready to kill. Okay, that's how sad it is. So now my question, it was actually highlighted that the success for African politics is youth organizations. So how do you organize these youths that have guns, these youths that are violent, and how do you change their mindset? So this is actually a problem for a young person like me that's not happy with the way things are done in my country, that I want to change the trend. So how do I do that? So that's my question.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that question, which I very much recognize, being myself also from Nigeria, and knowing the way in which the main political parties have basically reduced the youth of that country and a number of other countries effectively into both purveyors of electoral violence as well as cannon fodder in the struggle for for power. And as you know yourself, in the Nigerian context, there are different levels of organization beginning to take shape with a view to introducing another way of doing politics, particularly targeted at the young people of our continent and of Nigeria more specifically. And here I think what you might need to then define for yourself is the kind of entry point that is most appropriate to the competence as well as the interest which you have. At one level, there are those who have set themselves up to challenge the integrity of any election that is associated with violence. And you saw it work out in Edo State in Nigeria, as well as in some of the more recent elections conducted by the Election Commission, under the weight of popular pressure, saying that any iota of violence in any constituency will render the votes in that constituency null and void. And INEC, the Election Commission, has actually implemented that and produced what it called inconclusive election results in the process to force a rerun of the votes in the particular constituencies affected. And it's a group of activists, mostly young activists in Lagos, in Abuja, and elsewhere in the country that have underwritten this approach through direct engagement with the Election Commission leadership, but also through campaigns that they undertake. The Nigerian context also has a very rich litigation industry of people who, again, a lot of them young lawyers, as you know, who are on standby to challenge every irregularity, including the financing of thugs through the judiciary and getting the judiciary to be actively involved in regulating that aspect of political life. So I think there again, there's an opportunity for young people. There are more mainstream NGOs that engage in civic education and try to reach out not only to schools and universities and so on and so forth, but also to those who are themselves active in violence. You may have seen video clips, short video clips produced in English, but also produced in local Nigerian languages, in which a young person is saying to a political godfather that actually I'm through with wielding the gun and the machete to perpetrate violence for your account, when in fact you have sent your own children to school in the United States and Europe and elsewhere, far from the theater of electoral violence, and putting me in the front line of the violence. And all for what? For pittance, because the payment that goes with the recruitment of the violent youth actually amounts to very little. This has been produced by organizations in Nigeria, by NGOs, trying to reach that mass of young people, usually highly unemployed, long-term unemployed young people who have been effectively transformed into cannon fodder by the political elite for fighting out their contestations. So again, my view is that it's a tough and challenging context, but it is not an impossible context. And there are initiatives that are underway, which are making an inroad in denting the effectiveness of the use of political violence as an instrument for acquiring power. Thank you.
Dr. Adebayo, we're running out of time, but we have 2 minutes to ask one more question. And next online is Jeffrey.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions. Maybe you can just allow me to ask them quickly. So my first question will be directed to Dr. Moyo. So the question is, how can the youth engage meaningfully in community sensitization during the electioneering period? Now, take a context, for example, a candidate who seemingly enjoys good leadership from a community perspective, but on an objective analysis, they have serious integrity issues. Yet at the same time, they have so much power and they're able to downplay or cover up these issues. And at the same time, they are also able to enjoy like very good airtime with the media. So how can the youth then engage meaningfully with the community, you know, to warn of such people? The second question
please
can be
just one question because we have other people on the line and we're time. So I will ask the other folks to ask your questions and then we can have Dr. Moyo and Dr. Adebayo answer all of them at once to save time. Next online is Nawa, and after Nawa we have Enodice and Katlego. Sorry. And the final person with the hand raised is Cliff, right? Sorry for mispronouncing your names if I did.
Thank you, moderator. Mine is not really a question, but it's a comment, and it's directed to Dr. Moyo. I think there's a tendency of so my name is Nawa. I am from Zambia. I am from a movement called Youth for Parliament that works to enhancing participation of youth in politics. Jumping on to my comment, I think there's a tendency by the older generation in misunderstanding the intentions of young people wanting to get into active politics and taking up leadership position. And the reason is simple: these leadership positions, because we are excluded. These decisions are made, they don't reflect the aspirations of young people. So we want to secure our livelihoods by getting employed elsewhere and then joining politics. But the problem the people that create, they want to make those decisions that allow our livelihoods. So we want to get into politics, hold these decisions so that we can hold these positions so that we can make decisions that allow us to have young people get jobs so that as they get into politics, they don't use it as a money-raising venture. But as long as young people are not given space in these decision-making positions, the decisions that are going to be made are not going to allow young people to access jobs, to access economic opportunity. The idea to do, they must first fend for their lives before they can decide to take up political office is one that is neither here nor there, because what you are saying is that the young people must now hold on for them to find jobs that sometimes will take 5 years. I am a graduate, colleagues. I've not been employed for the past 5 years. I've been looking for employment actively. The people that are being employed are people that are politically connected. I want to get into political spaces. I want to get into political people like me who are graduates out there to get jobs without having to suffer or having to look for political connections. But if you tell me to secure a livelihood for myself first before I get into political leadership, that will be in the next 10, 15 years. I will be old. So I think I disagree with him in principle and fundamentally. I thank you.
Can we have Enodice? Please unmute yourself, and Cat Lego be online. And please, briefly, 30 seconds, ask your question, brief.
Okay, yeah. My name is... Yeah,
it should be Enodice, isn't it?
Enodice, please. Cliff, can you wait for your turn?
All right, thank you. My question is on what I call toxic politics, or politics of tribes, or politics of ethnicity. I just want to know, how can young people participate where you have politics that is based on tribal lines? What can they do? We have noticed that negotiated democracy cannot really solve this problem, or the issue of power sharing deals. Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to find out, and I have an additional question on what Dr. Moyo said. The question is also being directed to him. He said that we have to wait before we engage ourselves in politics. At the same time, the other guy posed a similar question, stating that we'll be old by then. And then Dr. Moyo said that if that guy was to fail in politics, then where is he going to land on? So now, my further question would be, if one after one manages to be in the president, that also can influence, and not only just that, there is also a little amount attached to that, which can help one to settle for president. So now, how is this going to be possible if one doesn't for not having participated during their livelihood until they are old enough? Because we can't only just be prepared for ourselves to be a future politicians without making an attempt of being elected. So one is supposed to step into office before that comes, because I would say that when one fails, that will be another opportunity for them to serve. It's not when one fails the elections, they will come, then that will mean that they have definitely they can't serve anymore as a politician or as a president. So my question is that a young person engages himself in politics and then they fail to achieve their political career for the second term. Does that mean that will be their end, or that won't have anywhere where to land without the influence which they have accumulated on their own? Thank you.
Okay. Kat Lego.
Okay, thank you, facilitator, for giving me this opportunity. Greetings to everyone. My name is Katako, and I'm based in Johannesburg. My question is directed to Dr. Olukoshi, and I wanted to understand what is the significance of the relationship between the youth and state apparatus such as the military. Because to a certain extent, we've seen over the years, beginning with the Arab Spring, that with the majority of the youth coming out to protest and demonstrate that they don't want a certain leadership, the military has had to intervene in order to uphold the people's vote or the people's wishes. So in that, on that point, what I want to understand is that how could the relationship between the military and the youth or citizens in general have an impact in actually upholding and respecting the wishes of the people, considering that analysts were also saying with the Zambia elections that Lungu only decided to hand over power because the military had declared that they recognized the president-elect. He'd won the elections, and that should he refuse to relinquish power, they will intervene. So that is my question, and thank you.
Thank you. We will take final question from Senio. You have your hand raised, and then we will have Dr. Moyo and Dr. Adebayo answer all of them at once.
Okay, thank you, facilitator. Dr. Moyo and Prof. Adebayo, my question is very simple. The youth of Africa is competing against the youth of the world. The youth of the world have opportunities that the youth of Africa are not getting. One day, we, the youth of Africa, are going to take political power and are going to take the reins of governance violently. Dr. Moyo, I don't know, but then the youth of Africa don't only want to be in politics. We want equal opportunities. If it's in farming, if it's in ICT, if it's in other jobs, you just want equal opportunities. Politics is just a small fraction of what the youth of Africa is demanding. What can we do as youth of Africa to also ensure that we are competing on even keel with the youth of the world? Otherwise, one day we, the youth of Africa, are going to take it violently. You mentioned Thomas Sankara and all those. They took it violently through a revolution. I don't know if you're going to get there someday, but I know it's coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Moyo, some of the questions are related. If you can take all of them, the ones about the politics, youth in politics, and then after Dr. Adebayo will take the other two questions directed to him.
Thank you, Isatu. I can see that I stayed a hornet's nest. the youth think that I don't want them to be in politics. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I think the quality of a solution depends on the proper identification of what the problem is. If we misidentify the problem, we'll always come up with the wrong solution. Africa is suffering because of bad leadership, and that's not necessarily a preserve of old people. In my country, I can tell you for a fact that a lot of actually active actions of banditry, politically and otherwise, are performed by young people. The beating up of people at election time is done by young people, not by old people. So we need to really have clarity about bad behavior and bad leadership is not confined to a particular age. So when we're talking about getting our continent to work, the most important responsibility of a citizen is, as Professor Adebayo articulated, to be politicized, a political consciousness, be a political agent. The topmost responsibility for a citizen, in my opinion, is the vote. The vote is foundational in terms of being able, like I said, you know, equivalent to being on a panel of employment. You are choosing, whether they are old or young, you're choosing the correct quality, the correct caliber, correct merit for the job you want done. So, activism, be politically active, be a voter in order to make the choices. Young people, because of your numbers, even if we said, let's assume that I'm wrong and all of you can choose to go into politics, how many of you are going to get jobs in politics? In political office, how many? A tiny number, minuscule number, totally, actually, almost irrelevant. The biggest issue for you is participation in voting to choose the correct leadership. I put it to you and I want you to answer my question. You want young people to get into political office before they've got anything that they are qualified to do. Is it not the same as saying, go get married when you cannot? Don't go and get married and come to Nkosana to support your wife, because then you don't have a wife. I'm sorry, I'm being fairly crude about it, but you know what? We need to have honest conversations. Nawa, I think it was Nawa in Zambia. If you can answer that question for me, do you get married when you cannot support a wife and go and ask other people to support your wife? You don't. Why is it you are prepared to do that and don't understand the importance of being solid career-wise before you go to become a servant? Politics for me should not be something you do for money. It should be something you do because you want to render a service. Servant leadership. You want to render a service to your country, to your community. If you're doing it as a service, it means you need to have a means of livelihood independent of then being tempted into stealing from all of us. Because most of the time, if you go into politics as a young person without anything else you can rely on, you won't want to get out of power because you can't afford to get out of power. You won't be able to support yourself because you need the money from the public purse in order to support your family. That's where some of our problems come from. So let's understand what the problem is, and let's understand the role of citizenship. Voting is the biggest issue that is a problem for us, and voting for the wrong people, not using meritocracy as a basis, voting for tribe and relatives, people who've got nothing to offer. Let's sort out those things. The policies then will allow you to get a job. They will allow you to participate in politics without necessarily holding political office. That is the solution.
Thank you.
Clear.
Can we have Dr. Adebayo to respond, please, and then we move to the breakaway rooms.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that further clarification. I think it was good to press the issue about politicization. And I subscribe fully with the framing which Dr. Moyo just gave in further elaborating on what he needed to convey. And I'll just add there that it's not a chicken and egg kind of thing, because by the very fact of citizenship, we say nowadays actually that the highest office in any country in the land is not so much that of the president, but that of the citizen. And insofar as efforts are made by those who are in office to abridge our full citizenship, I think we have a challenge at that level to ensure that we also win back that right of citizenship. And it could be at the level of student unionism, it could be at the level of civic activism, as much as it could be at the level of the organization of a political party and entry into mainstream politics. The important thing is the exercise of agency as a citizen. And that exercise of agency at its most basic in the context of the social contract between state and society, between us and our governments, between citizens and governments, is conjugated at the level of the selection of those who lead us and our capacity to hold them accountable once we have elected them into office, as well as the freedom to vote them out of office. I just want to note very quickly, I start in passing, I mentioned the Bhutan example, and Bhutan is a very small country. Some might even dismiss it as not terribly representative of the mainstream global experience in the organization of power. But the Prime Minister of Bhutan, full-time Prime Minister of Bhutan, is also a full-time medical doctor. He goes to the hospital to perform his duties as a doctor alongside his role as the Prime Minister of his country. And the same thing for the cabinet in the country, the same thing for the members of parliament. You come to politics with a vocation. And I think that was the message also, that for those who want to go into full-time politics, perhaps don't repeat the same difficulty, if I may put it that way, that we've been confronted with on our continent. We have too many professional politicians. They don't do anything except politics full-time. And these full-time politicians have become a charge in the public force. They don't produce anything. They are parasites, actually, at the end of the day. Wielding all of the advantages of office and power, they basically are preying on society. And you'll see quite a lot of writings in political science nowadays, looking at the African context, from the theories of neo-patrimonialism down to what some even refer to sometimes in dramatic fashion as the vampire state, the making of the vampire state. And vampire just basically sucks blood. These guys don't come with a project of society, they hold power, and they live off the sweat of everybody else, corruptly and otherwise. So there is a need to reimagine politics on our continent. And reimagining politics, I think, will mean putting all of these questions on the table for full reconsideration. How can we discipline politics, both to a broader societal purpose, and also to a developmental imperative, and make it the least, well, certainly not the most attractive thing for anybody to do. And the colleague from Zambia was right. The quickest way to make money in Africa is to go into politics. You don't even need any skills. Thugs have risen to become members of parliament, thugs. School people who didn't finish any schooling have taken advantage of access to politics in order to be able to amass incredible amounts of wealth without any investment in production, without any innovation, without. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to overflog it. And I know we are racing against time. The power of organization at level is very important in the direction in which institutions like the army will swing. they are not uninformed. When they see the direction in which the bulk of society is moving, they are very unlikely to go in a contrary direction. And that's what you saw with Egypt under Mubarak. You cited the example of Zambia more recently. And that is only because they see the power of the people in action. They might want to go back later, as they did in Egypt, to reorganize themselves in order to take the initiative from the people and reinstitutionalize some form of authoritarian governance, such as we see in Egypt today. But at the moment, where decisions have to be made to swing in one direction or the other, historically, militaries have been known to withdraw support from a failing dictatorship. You saw it also in Sudan. They withdraw support from a failing dictatorship, an unpopular government, and flow with the people. It happened in Tunisia, it happened in Sudan, it happened, even in Nigeria with student protests and the like. The military have been known basically to withdraw support from a particular regime, including a military government, in order to be on the quote unquote the right side of history. But there is also the flip side, where they feel that actually it's not a movement, it's not a popular movement. And I can give you the example of Zimbabwe, which we know of in recent times, where the military actually, in the face of a rising opposition movement, is able to go out to intimidate the citizenry by saying that it will not salute the flag if an opposition party leader was voted into office. And that kind of intimidation is possible in the absence of a popular mass opposition to the structure of power that the military are seeking to defend. Senyo, you are right. I think you are right to be angry. I hope it will not be a violent uprising that will bring about the change that we want to see. And I think part of our conversation today is precisely to put our thoughts together and see ways in which we can deliver transformation on our continent without the violence that will go with it. And I'm all for the youth taking over. I think we've done our bit as an older generation. And really the baton should pass on as it must. And we hope that the youth who will take over are the kinds of politicized youth, because don't forget also that there are criminal youth, the politicized youth who will be able, on the basis of a vision, to take us to the next level and make all of us proud of being Africans. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adebayo and Dr. Moyo, and thanks everyone for your questions. We ran out of time, over 30 minutes on the Q&A, so we're going to do a slight change. We will go on to the breakaway rooms. So the breakaway rooms will pop up, and then you can choose whichever room that you registered or the one that you want to attend. We will limit the time in the breakaway room to 30 minutes. We're going to come back in the main plenary at 3 o'clock. I am in the morning time. I'm trying to figure out with the time, but we will come back after 30 minutes. That's like 3 South African time. And then from there, we continue with the plenary. We will cut away the break. Apologies for that, but feel free to unmute or mute yourself and take a minute break if you want to. But we're not gonna have any break. We will just go ahead with the breakaway rooms right now. Can we have Nonko to help pop on the breakaway rooms on the screen so people can select the one they want to join? And then after 30 minutes, we're gonna come back here. A reminder for the speakers, you are responsible for facilitating the breakaway rooms and have someone to take notes and report back. Select a moderator or a presenter. After the 30 minutes, the person will come back and report back to the whole group what you discussed. Thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. The next thing we have on the program, we will be having a report on the discussions and recommendations from the breakaway rooms from the 4 different groups. I hope all the breakaway rooms have selected their speakers or the moderator to report back on their discussion. So we will start with the first one, women and elections. Actually, I was the one taking notes in that group. Unfortunately, we didn't have the other 2 speakers. We only had Ruth in the group. Maybe I would like to, since we have few minutes for this report back, if Ruth, you would like to just briefly share your own experience as someone who stood for elections, just briefly, because we have few minutes for this report back. Each group have like 5 to 7 minutes. And then I can share some of the notes that I took, the things that we discussed as a group. Ruth, would you like to share, or you want me to just? It looks like, I don't know if Ruth is in. So go ahead and share what we discussed. We started by giving Ruth the opportunity to share her experience as someone who contested in the local government council primaries in her community in Zambia. So we talked about the challenges that young women face, young people face, including most especially young women when they try to get into politics. Some of the challenges we discussed were most of the time young people and young women in particular experience a lot of pushbacks from the older generation when they think about getting into office. They will get remarks like, you're too young, you don't have experience. And some political parties will ask the young women who are interested to contest to wait and give chance to the older women, which Ruth experienced. She said her experience that the political party that she was interested to represent, she was part of the party prior to the election year. And in all those previous years, she was also doing a lot of youth activism, encouraging young people to be involved in politics. But when she decided to contest for office, she belonged to the party and decided to go ahead with the primaries, but was asked to wait and give chance to a more experienced woman. And she felt that she needed to stand her ground and instead of waiting for the next 5 years election to go ahead and contest as an independent candidate. Some of the things she faced was like challenges such as like how to change the status quo and ensuring that young people demand for the space. Because sometimes if you are not fully strong and you don't really stand your ground and demand for the space, you will not be given the space, because that's her experience. She was asked to wait for somebody else and she felt that really didn't align with what she wanted. That was why she went for an independent candidate. She fought, did all she could do and then came out second in the primary. But then the person that actually is the person that is elected is now part of the ruling party, the councillor. So some of the things we talked about was young people need to really come out and stand for elections, in particular young women, to make sure you stand your ground and demand for these spaces, because obviously you will face these challenges. Something else we talked about that most young women face when they get into politics is that sexism. Most of the time, young women will experience sexism, such as things around their gender. They will be labeled, they will be harassed, they will be called names and will be asked to go in the home. There will be remarks that they should not be in the public, they have to be in the home and take care of the kids, and all of those gender roles that young women and women in general face when they get into politics. Something else to Ruth said that she experienced was tribalism, because based on the region that she came from and her last name, Kangwa, people thought that maybe like because of that, she should not stand in that region and should have been in another region. So sometimes there are issues of tribalism that young people face. when they get into politics. But we discussed and agreed that since young people, we are the generation that should make the change, we should also be involved in fighting the tribalism and all of the operation that exists when young women contest for election. Something else we also talked about as challenges that hinder young women when they try to contest for election, or women in general, includes gender-based violence, especially if they are contesting against a man, because most people think that that individual is out there to challenge that man. I know in Gambia, there are some women who are interested to contest for election. There's a woman who said she wants to contest for the upcoming presidential election. Right now, she's facing all horrible forms of sexual harassment in the media, online, based on her appearance, and the men are not being asked about all of those things. So this is definitely a challenge that women face when they get into politics. There was also the issue of finances, that some young people who are interested in contesting for elections or getting into the political space most of the time face this challenge, because young people are generally poor and young women are poorer. So there was this question of how do we deal with that? But we also discussed that as Africans, we need to get away from the mindset of commercialization of politics, trying to use money for politics. Dr. Moyo was in our group, and we shared that because of the mindset that most Africans have, that you need money to be successful in politics. That is why there is a lot of corruption in the voting process. And unless we stop sowing the seeds of corruption while we are in the political process, even before the person gets elected, that is what breeds corruption when individuals get into politics. But we also discussed the other perspective, that even though we need to move away from the commercialization of politics, there is also resources challenges that young people face. Young people face money, resource challenges, and they need money to do a lot of communication work, a lot of planning, campaign strategizing, and mobilization. But we discussed that even though those resources are needed, there could be a way out, and we could start from our family, our close network, use social media, and talk to people that are really believing, or that really believes in our ideas, to spread our message, instead of holding on to the challenge that we need financial resources. Ruth said an example that she was not, as a candidate, she was not a person with money. She didn't have money. The person that actually came third was the most rich or most strong candidate when it comes to finances, and actually came third. So she said that she didn't have a lot of money, or she didn't even have money when she was running for election. But what she did was believed in her message and used the people that believed in her message and mobilized at grassroots level to spread across her message and talk to people about what she wanted to do. And it worked out. We also talked about the importance of having leadership trainings, intergenerational dialogue for women who are interested in running for office, and the women that are already in office. It is important for women that are holding political office to be engaged in intergenerational dialogue with the women that are interested, to share more ideas, to share tips and strategies of how to support the upcoming women, for us to increase women's political participation and representation in Africa. This is what we discussed in our group. We also talked about the low representation, and because we have a lot of low representation of young people in politics in Africa, Zambia, Gambia, and a lot of countries, young people are really represented. Some countries have 1%, some even don't have 1%. It is important for young people to be in politics, but it is also very important for young people to get the skills and capabilities that they need before getting into office. We also talked about that. So if we can have the next group to report back, and then after we do all the report backs, then we can have final conclusion and open discussion about these reports. Can we have group 2, representative of group 2, the room 2, youth, citizenship, and elections?
Thank you so much, Isatu. It's Motom Tim Kulu here reporting back from group or room 2. Please don't mind me, I was taking down notes shorthand. We'd open up our discussion in fundamentally, or I open up the discussion in explaining that I'm an attorney who then became a politician. I worked within the capital city of our country, South Africa, and I was deputy chief whip. I then went on to fundamentally disagree with what Dr. Moyo was saying about youth participation in politics as opposed to being politically active. I believe that by sidelining the youth to be simply activists or vote getters, sidelines us to not be in the rooms where decisions are made. I was very fortunate to have Ras Hain and our friend Nawa from Zambia in the group, who also gave great inputs. When I started off, we discussed the fact that in the corporate sector, when you look at anybody between the ages of 70 to 80, they're usually out of work because we're looking at a skills mismatch or mental decline. Whereas exclusively on the African continent, all our presidents, prime ministers, cabinet leaders are 60 and above. In a continent where the majority of the population is below the age of 40, yet the majority of the leadership is above the age of 70, that's a mismatch that has to be somehow questioned. And I mentioned the things that it's two parallel lines that seem never to want to meet. But not only did we disagree with Dr. Moyo about him saying, his adage about would you get married before you can able to support a family or your wife. The issue is not about jumping the gun. And the issue is, that adage presumes that every single young person wants to be a politician. As Ras Hain said, there are many, many intellectuals out there who are very comfortable in the private sector. But the issue is that if we do not give young people a chance to enter the political space and thereby change the rules and the rules, the laws and regulations that limit the advancement of the youth in our countries, we'll never be able to fundamentally change anything. My brother from South Sudan, Kenny, spoke about how in his country the major issue is tribalization, where the issue is that the youth do not see themselves fundamentally as South Sudanese first and foremost, but they see themselves as belonging to a tribe, which then makes political mobilization very, very difficult, because fundamentally it is tribal structure. And these people, the young, are then manipulated, used by tribal warlords, and it becomes a situation where somebody who's uneducated or undereducated is it's easier to manipulate such a person. Which is why I go back to the consideration that if we have younger people in decision-making positions, we will ensure that education, we will ensure that access to opportunities, we will ensure that access to the growing economy are open to the youth, so that not everybody looks at politics as the get out from, as my friend Ras said, as a way out from your lower or middle class background. Dr. Moyo again, and I'm sorry it seems like we're attacking Dr. Moyo, but we're not. We're just robustly pushing back. Dr. Moyo said that if an 18-year-old enters parliament and is voted out in the next election, what would that person have to do? There is no way we are advocating that 18-year-olds are representatives of people in a national house. 18-year-olds can barely represent themselves, let alone a constituency. We are talking about introducing individuals who are educated, who have skills, who have expertise. And as Dr. Adibayo said, with the example of Bhutan, where you are a part-time politician and a part-time professional. As he mentioned with the example of the Prime Minister of Bhutan, who's a full-time surgeon. And one thing that we looked at is the reason that we have the elders in charge of the youth, is that a traditionally African basis? Are we hampered on this continent due to our traditional values? Because you look at Europe, if you look, for instance, Emmanuel Macron became a president of a nuclear power state at the age of 39. We don't have a president on this continent who's below the age of 65. And we need to ask ourselves as the Africans, what is it that we really want? And more importantly, we need to ask ourselves as the youth, what is it that we want? Because of course, not everybody wants to be a politician, but we want to be given the opportunity and the abilities. I mean, we have the abilities, but we want to be given the opportunities to sit at these tables where decisions are made. Because if I'm at a table where the cabinet says we're going to rustle up a couple of youths in the township for them to be stone throwers, the youth in the room will push back against that. But the fact that our voice is not in the table, is not in the room, we have no seat at the table, we can barely build our own table. what is the next step? I suggested that there should be quotas within national parliaments, 50% men, 50% women, and among the 100%, 40% under the age of 40. But a lot of people say gender parity, and unfortunately, the youth doesn't have the time to wait for things to organically to work out. The reason that quotas are entrenched is to go over past injustices in the quickest way possible. So for us to have to wait for the elders and those who hold power currently to want to change the status quo, as I said earlier in my Breakaway group, it's like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas. There is no way that those in power are going to vote for themselves out of power. That power has to be taken by force. And as a colleague from, I think it was Nigeria who spoke earlier on, he said that there will be a time where the youth will take power by force. And we don't want to get to that position. We've never wanted to get to the position of violence or even social discord. But the fundamental issue is that the youth is being undermined on this continent. And as Professor Lumumba said, it is only in Africa where we are told that we are the leaders of tomorrow. But the politicians of the day are making damn sure that the tomorrow that we are supposed to run never comes. And that was the report back from Group 2. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Room 2. We will have Room 3. I believe is the one about ethical election participation. Can we have your representative to report back?
So we had a slightly different structure because our alumni, Antonio and Babukar, gave very intense and very informative perspectives. So I was taking down the notes. So they were more participatory. So I think I'll just report back quickly and then they can jump in where I missed stuff. So I'll just keep it short because of time. But Antonio opened up with a perspective on the situation in Cabo Verde and how the political system has changed, explaining that their new political model, like their political system is decentralized now. They're aiming towards decentralization, and young people are more participatory, but also that there's a model where there's a president and a prime minister. And yeah, so that's the new model, and he was explaining the changes the changes that they've seen so far, and young people are more participatory in that sense. And then Babukar is from the Gambia, and he explained his perspectives on his country. And I think the people in the call would know that the Gambia was once under a dictatorship, and now they haven't. But he was explaining some of the challenges that they're facing and the steps that they've been taking. And it's really important for young people to participate and to ensure that there's like free and fair, how can we participate in like free and fair elections? So he brought that up, which opened the floor to some of the questions that our participants in room 3 had. So one point that one of our participants, Senor, mentioned was that there's the decentralization might come across as like a really good model, but there are some issues in the sense that there could be a possibility that we could decentralize corruption as well. So it might not be, copy paste, like one size fits all, that the decentralization might not necessarily answer the question that's arising, which is like corruption. And asking also what roles, like if we have a president and a prime minister, what roles do they have? And that Antonio mentioned that the president, can't get rid of the prime minister, but he does have a moral responsibility to the citizens to do what's best for them. And yeah, that active youth need to participate in order to restrict corruption. And then a question that was asked was how much influence Minds has to ensuring that young people have free and fair participate and create the free and fair election process. And Babukar spoke about his experiences as that he was trained through a Minds through the Minds training sessions for the alumni, and he learned how to effectively mobilize at a grassroots level. And it had us thinking about like what ways forward, like what role Minds can play in ensuring that in creating that platform that young people can participate and and shape the future and create an Africa that they want to live in. And then Mohammed also asked, and Mohammed, Ella, and I think everyone, the general consensus, we left more with a question rather than answers, is just thinking about what we can do right now as young people. Like, there's a lot to be said, but what can we actually do in the moment to prepare ourselves to participate in that way? I think we're still seeking clarity in that regard. So yeah, thank you very much. If anyone has anything, he can just jump on.
Hi, I have something to say. This is Ella. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can get you.
Okay, so I was part of group 3. I wasn't able to put my point across, but then just following the discussion, and when we talk about human rights and participation in the electoral and political processes, usually the participation of women and youth overshadow the participation of persons with disabilities. But even when we speak on platforms like this, it's important to make sure that we make a deliberate move to speak about the participation of persons with disabilities in these political processes. They have human rights. They also have a right to participate in some of these political processes. The right to vote, to be voted for, to stand for public office, and etc. So it's important that even as we discuss, we also push the agenda to promote the participation of persons with disabilities. As much as it is youth and women, but there's also women with disabilities as much as there's youth with disabilities. So it's important that as we discuss, we include some of these issues so that even as we go back to speak to people in our organizations or people in our communities, we still raise these issues so that we can also sensitize the public. We can also raise awareness on their rights to vote, on their rights to participate, and then we can have a holistic approach to participation itself for women, for youth, and persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella, for that very important perspective. Sometimes we factor or we forget to include the most marginalized. We only talk about youth and women. It's important to include young people and women and people in general with disabilities. But I also want to add that we also include other people who are non-binary. We have a lot of young people in Africa that belongs to the LGBTQI community, and they face a lot of harassment, even though there are a lot of talks about their rights and all of that, but they're also people and young people. So we should factor all of the marginalized groups when it comes to participation, so their interests could be represented. So we will have the final person, the final room to give their report back. That is room 4. They were discussing the role of effective communication in election processes. Can we have their representative to report back?
Hi, Isata. So we also had a bit of a different setup in ours because our 2 speakers had a bit of trouble getting onto our call. So we've decided that the second contribution, which came from Mr. Emmanuel, is going to be our contribution to the summation of the 4 rooms, our 4 discussion rooms. So I'm just gonna give the floor to Mr. Emmanuel to make his summary. Yeah, to make his contribution here in whichever form which he feels most comfortable in, obviously within our time constraints. Also, if there's anyone who would like to translate that, just in case we're having a language barrier.
He will be speaking in French, right?
Yes.
Can we have French translation?
So we have to move to the French translation where we're going to be able to hear the translator translating for us in English when the speaker will speak to us. So the people who can listen French can stay on original audio, and the other one have to click on French to be able to hear the translation.
Oh, Karine, I was saying, can you maybe just translate the call to Mr. Emmanuel to share his contributions? Because I was just hoping that he didn't miss me.
Okay. Emmanuel. Oui, allez-y.
Allô, j'ai la parole, c'est ça? Allô, vous m'entendez?
Great. We can hear you.
Oui. Quelqu'un m'entend?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oui, par.
Oui, Emmanuel, vous pouvez aller partager votre rapport avec les autres. Oui, merci.
Voilà. Donc, je suis du Tchad, je m'appelle Emmanuel et je suis un jeune journaliste, blogueur et activiste des droits humains dans mon pays. En 2016, j'ai pris part à une session organisée par MENS sur les élections et bonne gouvernance en Afrique. Et cela m'a permis de connaître un peu les subtilités sur des questions d'élection de façon générale en Afrique. Et donc, après ça, après mon retour de Dakar, j'ai travaillé sur beaucoup de projets allant dans ce sens sur les élections en Afrique et notamment au Tchad. Et j'ai été marqué par une intervention de Dr Moyo, je ne sais pas si j'ai bien prononcé le nom, qui dit que les jeunes sont responsables des dirigeants qui sont à la tête de nos États. Et donc, l'Afrique a connu un bouleversement étonnant ces dernières années dans son système électoral. Les élections, que ce soit sur le plan local, législatif ou présidentiel, font généralement l'objet d'une attention particulière sur le continent. Et cela, c'est grâce aux médias, soit nationaux ou internationaux. Mais aussi avec la puissance aujourd'hui, par exemple, l'Internet et les réseaux sociaux jouent aussi un rôle très important dans les élections, dans les questions des élections en Afrique. Et les scrutins de ces dernières années en Afrique ont été émaillés parfois de graves contestations, par exemple. Et donc, pour revenir un peu à ce que dit mon collègue récemment, Mohamed, tout à l'heure dans votre groupe, c'est que les jeunes ne s'intéressent ces dernières années pas beaucoup sur les questions d'élection. Les jeunes ne s'intéressent pas. Les jeunes n'ont pas confiance aux dirigeants. Et donc, comment amener les jeunes à s'intéresser aux élections? Je pense que c'est la question que j'ai travaillé dessus. Et j'ai fait comprendre aux gens que, par exemple, les pouvoirs en Afrique, généralement, nous sommes, surtout en Afrique francophone, où les dictateurs sont beaucoup plus en règne en maître. Et donc, soit c'est les manifestations généralement qui se passent, notamment au Tchad, par exemple, où il y a plusieurs manifestations. La dernière élection de 2021 a fait l'objet d'une contestation de la classe politique, où les gens ne sont pas sortis voter. Et moi, j'ai toujours dit qu'il faut que les jeunes votent, parce que souvent, on refuse d'aller voter, et les dictateurs, eux, ils gagnent normalement les élections. Et donc, comment trouver des mécanismes pour amener les jeunes à voter? Et la participation générale a expliqué ce que c'est. Il faut expliquer ce que c'est que voter, ce que voter signifie vraiment pour les gens. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, dans certaines régions reculées, par exemple, ou dans les villages où il n'y a même pas accès à la route et tout ça, même les grands-parents ne connaissent pas ce qu'on appelle voter. Et donc, il faut amener les jeunes, grâce aux réseaux sociaux, grâce à l'Internet qu'ils utilisent tout le temps. Et je pouvais aussi partager avec vous parce que je travaille également avec les artistes musiciens où je fais la communication. Et donc, moi, je pense qu'il faut utiliser également le secteur de la musique, par exemple. Parce que les jeunes s'intéressent beaucoup plus à la musique. Et donc, pourquoi ne pas utiliser les musiciens lors des processus électoraux? Pourquoi ne pas utiliser les musiciens qui sont très proches du public à véhiculer des messages de sensibilisation sur les questions des élections? Parce que c'est très important quand même que les jeunes comprennent ces choses-là. Donc, je travaille aussi avec les musiciens sur des questions des élections, notamment au Tchad. Et ce qu'il faut comprendre, c'est qu'il y a une carence d'informations autour des problématiques des élections en Afrique. Mais à cela également, il faut pas oublier dans d'autres pays comme la Tunisie, l'Algérie, le Sénégal, la Tanzanie, le Burkina Faso, c'est des pays qui ont eu quand même ces dernières années des élections généralement qui n'ont pas eu vraiment de violence. Et ça, c'est des modèles que, au Tchad, par exemple, on suit de près ce qui se passe dans ces pays-là. Les élections ont également été marquées par des victoires incontestées, des transitions pacifiques et des taux remarquables de participation dans ces pays notamment. Et la mobilisation des jeunes a pris une tournure importante dans ces processus. Nous savons bien ce qui se passe au Burkina ces dernières années, même au Sénégal. Et toutefois, il faut souligner que les deux cas de figure n'ont pas échappé à la situation du Tchad lors des processus électoraux qui se sont déroulés depuis l'avènement de la démocratie en 90. Au Tchad, c'est en 90 que les élections ont véritablement eu écho avec l'arrivée de l'ancien président qui est décédé il y a quelques mois, il y a 4 mois, Idriss Déby, qui a amené la démocratie au Tchad. Et les élections sont organisées, mais c'est toujours avec des contestations. Donc, moi, c'est cette petite expérience-là que j'aimerais échanger avec vous. Et donc, pour moi, c'est d'utiliser les réseaux sociaux parce que c'est là où les jeunes se trouvent le plus. Et également, utiliser d'autres outils. Par exemple, travailler avec les acteurs, les musiciens, par exemple. Là, je parle vraiment de mon cas, je parle de ma communauté. Et je connais également, j'ai étudié un peu le comportement des jeunes. Je dis comment il faut toucher ces jeunes-là. Et donc, il faut aller outiller également ces acteurs-là de l'industrie musicale, leur expliquer ce que c'est que voter. Parce que les élections, il y a beaucoup de processus que les gens ne connaissent pas. Donc, définir ce que c'est que la démocratie, par exemple. Expliquer les indicateurs généraux acceptables de ce qu'on appelle la démocratie. Il faut également définir le rôle des élections dans une démocratie, identifier des parties prenantes et décrire la cartographie du pouvoir et son importance dans l'influence du peuple. Comprendre également ce qu'on appelle la biométrie. Tout à l'heure, maman avait parlé de la biométrie. Parce qu'on se retrouve même ici récemment à la dernière élection où une personne a peut-être 4 ou 5 cartes d'électeurs. Et là, ce n'est pas normal. Ce n'est pas du tout normal. Donc, essayez de comprendre également ces processus-là. Voilà, donc, en bref, peut-être c'est ce que j'ai à partager avec vous. Mais je reste quand même disposé au cas où il y a des questions et autres. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel, Mr. Emmanuel. Do we have somebody else from the group, or we can go ahead with the program?
I think we can continue. From our group, we're okay. We're from group 4. I think it's all okay.
So is that the final of all the groups, right? Emmanuel's presentation was representing the effective communication group, right? Room 4.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, all the groups. I think we have now come to the end of the dialogue. So I will just do a way forward and conclusion based on the discussion from the first panel we had, and then the breakout rooms and the discussion, the question and answer session with the panel discussion with Dr. Moyo and Dr. Adebayo. And then after that, then I will invite Ms. Nanko to give us vote of thanks and closing. I think the agreement here today is that young people should be given the space to participate in political spaces. Yes, we agree that Dr. Moyo's recommendation that young people, it is important for young people to not really wait, but prepare themselves first. And I understand that from the perspective of building yourself, not to wait until you get a job or not to wait until you have financial stability per se, but to prepare yourself, get your education, get your skills and capabilities before running for office. That will be one of the recommendations I would like to give here. Another recommendation and way forward, I think moving on from the dialogue, we all agree that young people have to demand for these spaces, because young people are not calling for the older generation to put them in parliament or to make them presidents, but to give them the opportunities to be in these spaces where decisions are made, so they can also talk about their needs and address the current challenges facing the continent. We all know that there are a lot of challenges facing the continent, which most of them young people are dealing with the burden. Youth unemployment, a lot of young people are taking the back way. There are violence happening in elections in some countries in Africa, and young people are the ones dying in those violence. Young people are the ones dying in those protests. Young people are the ones who are being used in some countries to be recruited in the warlords, like the example we had from South Sudan. I think it is very important for young people to also do a self-reflection. Young people in Africa in particular, to do a self-reflection about what we really want when we talk about political participation. Not everyone is interested to be in politics or to contest for election. And from my own perspective, I believe that political participation is not just contesting for elections. I think it is very important for young people to participate. And young people are currently participating in some countries. Young people are voting, and they also have other initiatives that they are doing to hold the government accountable. I think that is very important, that most of the time we tend to ignore when we talk about political participation of young people and women. Most of the time, our focus is voting and contesting for elections, but the participation about making sure we have accountability in the governance process, it's very important. We need to be the ones safeguarding good governance in our countries. We can have initiatives where we will be involved in scrutinizing the budgets, making sure the people, the representatives that we have in office, either in the parliament, in the local council, at the president level, in the cabinet, are doing what we ask them to do. For example, in the Gambia, there is this group called A+ Gambia. They are doing a very good job when it comes to scrutinizing public expenditure and budget spending of the country, which most of the time, many people don't even talk about. So it's important to do budget monitoring. Young people can identify the mismatches between the policies that the leaders have in place and the execution of those policies to be able to realize socioeconomic development of our various countries. Something else I think it's very important as a recommendation for us to go away with from this dialogue is the importance of having leadership training, the importance of having intergenerational dialogue with the leaders, the political parties. If young people are members of political parties and they have interest to contest for election someday, my recommendation will be to try to not just talk about the party to nominate you and go into those primaries with older candidates. But while you are a member of the party, if you join the party newly, look out for a politician who you admire, someone with integrity, someone with the credibility that you think can mentor you. You go into those mentorship, informal mentorship with that politician that you believe you share the same values, you learn things from them, build your skills, build your capacity, and mobilize at grassroots. Mobilize not by telling people you want to contest, but making sure that you do some work in your community, that one day when you said, I want to run for the local council, people will trust you and say, okay, we think you can represent us because you have been doing work in the community, you have been helping the community, even if you don't use your money or you don't belong to associations, but you actually have a community that you're helping. When there is something going wrong in your ward, you realize that you were scrutinizing the budget or you were raising your voice with the injustices happening in the community, they will actually say, this person we think we can trust and support to go for office or to run for office because they have been there for the community. Something else I also want to talk about, or a recommendation I want to talk about, is that young people should try to mobilize themselves and make sure we have our own groups that exist to support other young people that are interested in a volunteer way. If we have young people in our communities that are interested to run for parliament or to run for local council, and don't have the resources, but you are good with social media, you are good with grassroots mobilization, you are good with communication in general, you can volunteer if you align with that individual's values and support the individual in campaign mobilization, in planning, in strategizing, or running their social media handles, making sure their policies are known by the public. And I want to encourage us young people for us to do away with the politics of commercialization or commercializing politics. But the only way we can do away from commercializing politics is to make sure that we go ahead with the idea of politics of ideas. If we as young people are interested to run for office, we should do away with the politics of tribalism, the politics of insult, and the politics of corruption, buying of votes. Even if our political parties are interested in that, or that's what we know from the older generation, we as young people should try to do away with that and make sure that when we are running for office, we run based on ideas, we run based on programs that we sell out to people for them to believe in our programs, and hopefully one day we will get into office, and try to avoid people using us into violence, because at the end of the day, young people are the ones who will die in this protest. We are the ones who will die in this election violence. And as Dr. Adebayo mentioned, the example of Nigeria, most of these rich older men, politicians, have their family out of the country. If violence happens, they will be safe. We are the ones who will die in this country's election violence. So we should try to promote peaceful elections, try to promote fair elections, and make sure we scrutinize the whole governance process, from the registration process all the way to the voting. And once these people get to office, we also scrutinize the budget and make sure things they said they're doing for us, where are they really doing for it, and make sure they're doing it in the right way and spending our resources in the right way. If they don't, we register, vote them out, and bring the people that we think can represent our interests. That's what I wanted to share as conclusion and way forward. So I will invite Ms. Nanku, who is the Minds Commission, to give us vote of thanks and closing.
Thank you very much, Isata. I think that the concluding remarks have very genuinely captured so much of what we were trying to discuss and come to by ourselves. And of course, there's going to be a lot of contradictions to those points and additions, and that's exactly the type of environment that we're trying to fertilize here and make able to grow, is one where we can agree and disagree and come up with a way forward from our disagreements. And in that, I would like to first and foremost thank everyone who's stayed here for this call, who's participated and lended us so generously of your time and expertise. We do not take for granted how much of your day you've dedicated to us and to this process as well of building a better Africa, or the Africa of our dreams. The Africa that perhaps the generation that is behind us dreamt of and is now our struggle to bear. Thank you so much for giving of yourself so selflessly. And we genuinely wish to have you back, and we wish to continue these conversations as much as possible. Thank you, secondly, to our guest speakers from all over the continent who've shared with us how far they've come with their own election processes, and who've also given us so much of their time throughout this process. We know that this is a very new platform, and there was a lot of back and forth, but you stuck with us, and your contributions have been very well received and have left a lot of weight on our shoulders for us to carry forward. And we do plan very much to take them seriously and to use them in how we're going to measure ourselves and measure our steps going forward. Thank you very much as well to our keynote speakers, Dr. Moyo and Dr. Olokoshi, for joining us and giving us their perspective. As we know that this is the project of Africa is not only in one set of people, but it has to be intergenerational, inter-ability, interracial, inter-everything. So thank you so much for giving us your time as well. And last but definitely not least, my team actually had told me to emphasize this point. But thank you to our lovely moderator, Isatel. You've made this project such a great success, and you've brought us here so seamlessly. We can't begin to thank you enough for your professionalism and how graceful you've been with this project, and how honest you've been in sharing yourself and sharing and giving platform for other people to share themselves. So thank you so much for the grace that you've shown us, and we wish you greater endeavors ahead, and hopefully even more work with us. But with that, I would like to close the session. Oh, and of course, thank you finally to our members in the team also who came together to make this possible. Your hard work has paid off, and this event is definitely one of many, and one for the books. So thank you very much, and we will see you next time.